Today we're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. Don't forget to take notes and to do the survey afterwards. So think about solving by graphing and factoring. We're going to put them together right now. So if I wanted to solve x squared plus 6x plus 8 by graphing, I would make a table. So then I would graph those points, and this is what I would get. So I've got zeros at -4, 0 and -2, 0. Well, when I factor this, I get x plus 4 and x plus 2. So I've got zeros at -4 and -2, and I've got factors of x plus 4 and x plus 2. So if we compare the numbers, what do you notice? Well, they're very similar, but their signs have changed. So we need to know about the zero product property. What it's saying is if a times b is equal to 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0, or both of them have to equal 0. So let's think about the zeros. -4 and 2 and -2. What value is 0, x or y? Well, the y value is 0. So instead of y equals x squared plus 6x plus 8, I'm going to replace the y with a 0 and have 0 equals x squared plus 6x plus 8. So therefore, my factors of that, x plus 4 times x plus 2, also equals 0. So a times b has to equal 0. So then either a or b or both of them are equal to 0. So I set them equal to 0. Then I need to solve it. So I subtract 4 from both sides, and I get x equals -4. Then I subtract 2 from both sides, and I get x equals -2. So my zeros are at -4, 0 and -2, 0. So let's try one without graphing. So first of all, everything needs to be equal to 0, but it's not. It's equal to -3. So I need to add 3 to both sides. So now I have x squared minus 12x plus 32 is equal to 0. I want to check and make sure to see if anything factors out. Nothing factors out here because they don't all have x's and they don't all have coefficients, so I can't factor anything out of the x squared term. So now I make my table. I've got the times side. 1 times 32 is 32, and I put my addition in, and I've got -12. So I need something that multiplies to be 32 and adds to be -12. Well, if I think of 32 and 1, I can never get 12. 2 and 16 can never get 12. 3 doesn't divide 32. 4 does. 4 and 8. Well, 4 and 8 make positive 12. So now I need a -4 and a -8. This gives me -12, and when I multiply it together, I get a positive 32. So now I have x squared minus 4x minus 8x plus 32. And I can split it in half and factor by grouping. So in my first set, I can factor out an x, so I get x minus 4. In my second set, I can factor out an 8, but I need to remember, I need a negative sign in the middle. So I'm going to have to factor out a -8 so that when I take out a -8, I get x minus 4. So now these match, so I group them and bring them down, and then the other two go together and I get x minus 8. So my factors are x minus 4 and x minus 8. So I set each of those equal to 0, and I solve. So I add 4 to both sides, and x equals 4, and I add 8 to both sides. So x equals 8. So my zeros are at 4, 0, and 8, 0. Let's try another one. So in this example, it's already set equal to 0, so I don't need to change anything. I need to check to see if something factors out. No variables factor out, no coefficients factor out, so that means that I can go ahead and get started. I start by making my table. I need something that multiplies together to be negative 20 and adds to be negative 1. So 1 and 20, I can never get 1 out of that. 2 and 10, I can never get 1 out of that. 3 doesn't divide it. 4 and 5, I can get 1 out of that. Which one would need to be negative in order to get a negative 1? Well, that would be a negative 5 and a positive 4. So negative 5 times 4 equals negative 20, and negative 5 plus 4 equals negative 1. So now I have 2n squared minus 5n plus 4n minus 10 is equal to 0. So now I split it in half and factor by grouping. 2 doesn't divide 5, so I can't take out a 2, but I can take out an n, and I'm left with 2n minus 5. And 4 doesn't divide both 4 and 10, but 2 does, so I can take out a 2, and I get 2n minus 5 again. So then these are the same, so now I've got 2n minus 5 and an n plus 2 is equal to 0. So now I set each piece, each factor equal to 0, and solve for the variable. So I add 5 to both sides. So 2n is equal to 5. So then I divide by 2. Then n is equal to 2.5. Then on the other one, I just subtract 2 from both sides, and I get n equals negative 2. So my zeros are at 2.5, 0, and negative 2, 0. Let's try another example. So here, again, it's not equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and I get 12x squared minus 64x plus 64 equals 0. Now I check to see if something factors out. A variable does not factor out. But what's my greatest common factor of 12, 64, and 64? Well, 4 is the largest number that divides 12, 64, and 64. So I can take out a 4, and I'm left with 3x squared minus 16x plus 16 is equal to 0. And now I'm going to factor that. I can leave the 4 alone. I don't need to worry about it. So in my multiplication, I need to do 3 times 16, which is 48. And then my middle term, I'm going to use as what I need to add to get, and that's negative 16. So 48 and 1 will never get me 16. 2 and 24 will never get me 16. 3 doesn't divide 48. 4 and 12 can get me negative 16, but they both need to be negative. So now I can split this, 3x squared minus 4x minus 12x plus 16. And factor by grouping. You can take an x out of the first one, and I get 3x minus 4. I want to take out a negative 4 out of the second one to get 3x minus 4. So now I've got 3x minus 4 and x minus 4 as my factors. Now don't forget about this 4 down here. We're going to bring it down and set it equal to 0. Now, I'm going to set each piece equal to 0. I don't need to worry about my 4 still, but I'm going to set the 3x minus 4 equal to 0 and the x minus 4 equal to 0. So when I add 4 to both sides, I get 3x is equal to 4. Then I divide by 3. So x is equal to 4/3 or 1.3. Repeating. Then I add 4 to both sides. And x is equal to 4. So my zeros are at 1.3, 0, and 4, 0. So, some things to keep in mind. Make sure the quadratic is set equal to 0. Factor, just like before, you need to set each binomial equal to 0 and then solve for the variable. Make sure your notes are filled out. Take the survey now and bring your questions to class tomorrow. Here are the survey questions in case you can't read them or you're watching the DVD.